Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Leann Bertsch. I was the former director of North Dakota for 15 years. Prior to that, I was a prosecutor, so I entered the criminal justice system a long time ago in a much different capacity and never expected to work in corrections. I currently work as a senior vice president for Management and Training Corporation over their corrections division. So we have facilities and programs and operations across the country, the UK and Australia. So I hope what I have to tell you today is, first of all, going to build on what Commissioner Kane and Secretary Inchie said. Commissioner Kane was before his time in a lot of thinking. And so that foundation is perfect for my presentation. And then I loved what Secretary Inchie is doing with Hope University, because we have to come into the new century and absolutely embrace technology, particularly in these times where the workforce issues are very challenging, right? So if we can have virtual people helping us out, it's going to help us a lot. So a little bit about my journey. So when I started with the Department of Corrections as the director, I knew absolutely nothing about prisons, knew quite a bit about community supervision, parole and probation, because you work closely with them as a prosecutor. And I also had the juvenile division, and I knew about that because did juvenile work. And I would say that I was a quick study, and one of the things I realized very, very quickly is I had the luxury, but also not the luxury, of working in a very small system. North Dakota only has 750,000 people in the state. So we have a small corrections population, and my goal was to keep it a small corrections population. And when I came into the system, it was under stress. There was a reason for administrative a change in the director, and no one was playing nice with each other. We had all these legislative studies going on, and there wasn't a clear mission or vision for that. There's a lot of infighting. But I'll tell you, in front of a legislative committee one day, I was asked, we were getting grilled about the need for medical care, dentists. And so one of the legislators said to me, well, why do we need dentists? I said, well, look, we're not giving them luxury, crowns and veneers. We treat for pain, infection, and the ability to chew. And she said, give them a blender. And so to me, right away, one of the first things that I realized is that we had to do a better job of really getting people to understand what our mission is. So if I were to tell you what the mission of the North Dakota Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation is today, it is transforming lives, influencing change, and strengthening communities. Because the prison system in any state is just a microcosm of the greater community. And I learned that very, very quick like. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story about how we went on to transform a system, because prisons sometimes do good, but they always do harm. And I keep that in my mind, because when someone is sent to prison, you are taking them out of their community for a very good reason sometimes. But the one thing you don't want to do is make them worse. And we can do that very, very easily. We can institutionalize them. We don't let them make a lot of decisions. We take them away from their families. They're not earning and supporting their families. And their family is stressed because they're in prison as well. And this was also ingrained in me that I ran such a small system that everyone knows each other. First time I walked through the state penitentiary, one of the residents says to me, Miss Bertsch, how's your husband? I grew up across the street from him. It's very small. My child's sixth grade teacher, I didn't know that she even knew me or what I did. As I was leaving her classroom, grabbed my hand and said, thank you for taking good care of my son. So the one thing I did not want to have to do is apologize for treating people poorly in a system that I was over. And so as we got started, so that's kind of the things I want to talk a little bit about. I'll get into this. But one of the big things is that as the system grew, North Dakota had always been kind of down home, residents, the officers talked to the residents, and that was good. But as the system grew, we lost something. And it was very apparent that we were losing something. And so I started down the list of things that we all do. Well, let's do more training. Let's get better programs. Let's do this. And we did all of that. 2010, I made every single employee in the Department of Corrections, juvenile, adult, probation, medical, food service, you name it, learn motivational interviewing. That went over like a ton of bricks, but we did it. And for the next year, we had learning teams. And the grumpy old night shift was saying, I'm going to vote for a new governor so they get rid of Leann because we're sick and tired of having to do this. Well, guess what? They didn't get rid of me too quickly. So the nice thing about longevity is we're not going to like be gone tomorrow. It's like not that we be here when you be gone. I wasn't the flavor of the day. So we started that. We revamped all of our programs. And one of the best things we ever did is as we were doing that, we learned that you can't just put people in programming and then they come back out of that program into a toxic living environment where you just undid all of these skill buildings and behavior change while they were sitting in the program room. So we said, let's try positive reinforcement. Social learning theory, it works. Works in schools, works with your kids, works with your spouses, it works. So instead of hitting people over the head, and Commissioner Kane said, you have to say yes all the time. You can't say no, right? And that's what he's getting at, social learning theory. And so we were going to start in our most challenging units. And one of those most challenging units was our special assistance unit with our seriously mentally ill. Very small, heavily staffed, highly trained staff. And then we were going to take it into our restrictive housing unit. And so this was back in 2010. And one of my long-term staff came to me and said, Leann, you are not going to get a crusty old correctional officer to write a positive behavior report on an inmate. Meaning we were going to try to catch them doing well. 4 positives to 1 negative. And I said, I think we can do it. And we started doing it. And guess what? That is transformational. So if I were to show you today, it's built into the system. It's built into their classification system. It's built into whether they get a parole. But in order to do that effectively, you have to make sure that your staff know how to communicate effectively with the residents. And when I talk about dynamic security, this is a concept. When I went to Norway in 2015, I thought we were doing pretty well. And then I saw a system that was 25 years ahead of us in their thinking. Now, we're not going to be Norway because we do not send our correctional staff to a 2-year academy where they come out with the equivalent of an associate's degree. But we can take the principles, and the most meaningful principle is dynamic security. So what is it? So it's really about how we teach people to interact and treat people like human beings and have a normal conversation. So, and it's security. So it's not soft, but if you don't know who you're working with, how do you know how to interact with them, right? So an alert group of staff who know their residents, staff are developing positive staff-resident relationships, and people probably go red flags. But if you just tell your staff, don't talk to inmates, they're going to manipulate you, how much behavior change do you think you get? Not a whole lot, right? Your correctional officers are your biggest program. Fair treatment and a sense of well-being, access to constructive and personable activities, and part of a 3-pronged approach, because you still need all other forms of security. So this isn't soft. Those are some photos. Those are from North Dakota. And the one where the correctional officer is bending down, talking through the food tray, people might go, what the world are they doing? That's a bad security practice. This is in our restrictive housing area, which is now in North Dakota called the Behavioral Intervention Unit, because we don't put people in restrictive housing just to segregate them. We put people there to change their behavior. So one of the first things I did when I came back from Norway is focus on restrictive housing reform, because it was the unit where we were doing the most damage to people. We were locking them up and hoping that if we isolate them for 23 hours a day without very little programming and interventions, that they would somehow come out into general population and be well behaved. Actually, they're less behaved. They're like animals. They're traumatized, and we've just actually made the prison and our community less safe. So one of the things that we did is we actually had to work with our staff, and each shift they had to have a meaningful interaction with each resident twice on their shift. And sometimes the staff we hire don't know how to actually have a meaningful conversation. So we actually started scripting it. And they had behavior things that they had. And some of it was very fun. Some of it was, tell me what your favorite animal is, just to break down barriers and have a conversation. But more than not, it was actually, let's have a skill building practice. And pretty soon, the people that are residents started seeing our officers as caring. They want to help us rather than this us versus them. And we would have staff resident days where we do unit activities. So whether it's a game of cornhole, some game in the park, on the yard, just some examples of that. Here's an example of what you get from that. Meaningful, kind, humane staff interactions. So this is a quote from a resident about one of our officers who said, I'm lifted up every day he's here. It's a joy watching and learning his kindness. So when we started doing positive behavior reports, one of the things that started happening, I used to have a stack of grievances on my desk. I started getting a stack of positive behavior reports written by residents on our staff. And do you think it's motivating for us to reward our staff for the great work they do? But it's even more meaningful for them to get recognition from the people they are actually serving, the residents. So that was a very rewarding piece of this transformation. Now here's an example, and some of my current folks that I work with said, man, our staff would be fired if they were doing this. It has to be okay to do this. So we actually encouraged not to shirk their duties, but to actually sit down and break down that barrier and do these interactions with our residents. This quote, so not everyone loved what we were doing right away. And so we actually had some former staff that were very, very transposed to this. They said, people come to prison to be punished. And I said, no, the loss of their freedom is the punishment. And some of them said, we should not treat them humanely. They really had some deep-seated beliefs. So there's this article that came out that was extremely negative. We had a lot of good articles, but the negative ones really get the press. And so our staff, who really had bought into this way of doing corrections, but more than that, the residents didn't want to see it reverse. So this is a quote from one of our residents when those negative articles came out, both print and TV. They said, so they're saying that we are going to be worse because you are nice to us. And by being mean to us, they're going to make us nicer to them. How the hell does that make any sense? It doesn't make any sense, right? And now in this day and age where we are short of staff, we need to make it okay to not park your genuine self at the door when you walk into prison to do your job. And so if you want to do that, you have to come into a system where it's okay to treat people like people. So the other pieces of dynamic security, which I learned about in Norway and really tried to implement in the system in North Dakota, was the import model, our own spin on that. Normalcy, how do you normalize the environment? Progression, and that's very common in the United States, where you step them down from a maximum to a more, where they have more autonomy. And then, of course, humanity. And so the goal overall is improve facility safety, improve community safety, improve wellness and job satisfaction for staff, and better opportunities to model and teach new behaviors, and reduce the risk in reentry. So I think the most ironic thing, the idea of prisons, is that you put a bunch of people who obviously ended up there for a reason. They have some behavior issues. Crime is behavior, right? And we don't expect our staff to be role models and coaches. Who do you think they're going to learn from? You know who they're going to learn from, right? So the implementation, staff training is key. One of the things that I realized when I came back and we tried to implement this is we would send them through our correctional officer basic, which was awful. It was 3 weeks long. It was very basic. And one of the things, because I went and sat through it, they teach them about downing the duck, inmate games, don't trust anyone, don't talk to them, you'll get in trouble. And then I came back and said, have meaningful conversations, role model this. And we hadn't taught them. So it was disaster. So I asked my director of training, who I had to replace with actually the director of education, who knew how to teach people how to learn. And it went from 3 weeks to 3 months, but it was very interactive. So had to change the curriculum, talk about philosophy. They'd have time in the classroom, then in the housing units with trained field training officers and coaching, then back in the classroom. And I know our staff already said we can't expend that much time on training. We need people in the housing units. But what they found out is now they were actually getting well-trained staff in the housing units with a lot fewer issues. So the import model. You have to open your doors and let the community be part of the solution. Collaborate with people who want to help you out. I used to get a call, and I worked for 3 different governors. And the first governor he caused a lot of stress sometimes. And I would get a call in the middle of the night from him or from his chief of staff and saying, Leann, I don't want any homeless sex offenders in the community. I said, well, I don't have control over housing, Governor. What do you want me to do? The thing is, there's community partners, if you let them, will partner with you and help you achieve your mission. So when we first started, I'd ask, we have people who actually want to come in and be a part of the solution. And some of the naysayers was, man, volunteers take time. They do take time, but they're worth the effort. You have to train them, supervise them, make sure that they're not going to cause problems. But once you embrace that, man, you just magnify the resources that you're going to have both in the facilities and out. But the import model really was not just bringing them in for anything. If I saw that there was a concert in the community, we'd get that concert to come inside the community too, because our folks are part of it. Team sports. What you're seeing on here, riding bike, is in North Dakota, there's this big fundraiser called the Great American Bike Race that basically fundraises millions of dollars for kids with disabilities. So we decided to bring that inside, and so our staff and the residents participate. And in one event, I think at the state penitentiary, they raised $10,000 between our staff and the residents. And by the way, our residents in North Dakota get paid to go to school, they get paid to do work in the institution, and they get paid in industries. That's not uniform across a lot of systems, but it is in North Dakota, and that had always been there. And I think that's a really cool piece of it, because The residents learn how to budget. They learn how to give money when they need to, especially for charity. And so it makes them emulate the free world. So those are just some things where you can actually bring it in. Normalcy. How do you make a facility not feel so damn prison-y? You know, I walk through and I'm thinking, would I want to work here? Does it smell good? Is the light good? Does it sound good? I mean, seriously, who wants to work in a place that smells bad, feels bad, noisy? So some of that, Colette, you can see Colette Peters, she's now over the Bureau of Prisons, good friend of mine in Oregon. They actually did a whole beautiful Japanese garden in the yard. You see up in the corner, that's at one of our minimum security prisons in North Dakota. And in the lower left, you see, which is a typical cell house. But one of the things we did before I was leaving is we started a program specifically for 18 to 25-year-olds. And one of the things we wanted to do is make it more homey. And so we changed the color up, we put some carpet, soft furniture, and you may not be able to see it in the picture, but there's actually a whole kitchen in the back because we want people to learn how to cook together. They do their own laundry, budget money, buy food, community. So one of the things that is really big in the prison is this sense of community. What do you want your community to look like? And you really engage the residents by thinking, I live here now. What do I want this community to feel like and look like? And give them some ownership over it. So that's at the North Dakota State Penitentiary. And when we talk about community, when a loved one goes to prison, their family goes to prison too, unfortunately. They may not live there, but they go to prison and they suffer this sense of separation. So we started doing family unification events at least monthly. It might be Easter, you know, egg painting, pumpkin painting, movie night with their kids, actually a dinner with your spouse. This is in the yard where spouses and their young children could come and participate in the yard. Maximum security prison, and we let them come in. We do barbecues, music, and whatnot to make sure that the family members do not become so isolated from their loved ones. Obviously, there's criteria around it. And then just some more examples of some normalcy. These are some of our prisons that we run for MTC, just Christmas decorating, things you do in the free world, right? Paints, plants. One of our initiatives is thinking about health of the environment. And this is not just for the people who live there, it's the people who work there. And that's important. When I said, does it smell good? Is there access to nature? Is there color? There's low cost, no cost things you can do. Does the door slam? Can you put rubber bushings on it? Can you soften the echoes? Can you bring life into the prison that's a plant? Can you do some of those things? Can you put a beautiful garden that both residents and staff can actually enjoy and de-escalate some of the stress that comes from being in these environments? So the individual who's in a Walmart, one of the things we started doing is, look, people who spend a lot of years in prison are overwhelmed when they walk back out into freedom. So before they walk back into freedom, can you take them on field trips? Can they go for, you know, a nice dinner with maybe one of the officers and their family so they learn how to have a normal conversation in a restaurant? Here, people who've been locked up for 30 years are overwhelmed by the amount of choices in a Walmart. So take them on a shopping trip, show them how to use a debit card or a credit card. Think about how they live. So that picture where you see houses, that's a minimum security prison in Norway. They actually live in houses and they're responsible for budgeting their money. It's basically run by residents. It's beautiful. So I don't have a beautiful island with beautiful houses for my minimum security, but when I did come back, we were overwhelmed. We needed more minimum security beds. We needed all custody beds. And we were at a point where we were going to have to send residents out of state, which I really did not want to do. So North Dakota went through an oil boom, and our plant services director said, Leann, we have all these vacant man camps sitting around North Dakota. What do you think about bringing one on site? Best thing ever. It was supposed to be temporary, but temporary solutions often become permanent. This became permanent, but it's a great solution, and that's those trailers you can see. So as people transition down, the ones that were going out on work release actually lived, and so they had their own bedroom, TV, they could get a decent night's sleep. They learned how to budget because we had them pay rent for every day they went out on work release, and they only shared like a bathroom, the Jack and Jill bathroom with it. So something that turned out as a good thing for people to actually have some autonomy and not be in an overcrowded, noisy dorm before they release. And we talk about building a restorative environment where people don't have to fear for their safety, but can actually work on the change they need to make. And so when I talk about a restorative environment and restorative justice practices, they are just as important for the staff who work in those prisons. People want to know that their jobs are meaningful. And so when we started instituting these practices and doing these unit events and breaking down the us versus them, doing the Great American Bike Race or doing these activities, these are some of the quotes from our staff about experiencing a oneness, or these guys like being treated like they will be our neighbors someday. They were started finding meaning in their jobs. When a case manager, I actually feel like we are rehabilitating people, not just locking them up. So this isn't just about doing your job better, because at the end of the day, it is about public safety and not being people coming out and re-victimizing people. But sometimes people who work in prisons are just as victimized because we have toxic environments in some of the facilities, right? And so this is just as much for people who live there as it is for people who work there. So Commissioner Kane was way ahead in his thinking when he viewed people in prison as a resource rather than a burden. And that was kind of an aha moment, I think, in our system in North Dakota, where too many inmates, not enough beds, not enough staff. And pretty soon we started realizing that, look, we've got a lot of people who are incarcerated that have a lot of value and a lot of skills. Why don't we put them to use? And we can do it meaningfully. So these are just some examples. Created a certified nurse assistant training program. If you don't do that, you should. Because when you actually put people who are in prison and all of a sudden they are now caring for another human being, that's transformational. Now, some of our medical staff were a little bit skeptical. They would never have this program go away. It was life-changing for them because all of a sudden they saw themselves not as a convict, not as an inmate, not as a felon, but as someone who had value and adding value to another human being's life. Create a medical caregiver job. When I was there, and this was before my time, that they had already started critical incident training. So people who are on observation because they're self-harming or suicidal, we would actually train the residents to sit with them, talk with them, and we actually give them additional good time, but also pay. And for the first 12 years I was there, we never had a single suicide. So it's a really good practice, and it's meaningful. Implement a resident peer support program. Peer support, I will guarantee you, if you've got young bucks who are dusting up or people who come in and their behavior is bad, they probably aren't not that receptive to authority right away. But you know who they will listen to? People with lived experience. And so we actually brought in and trained peer support individuals. They'd been in the system a long time, and some of them said, man, I wish I would have had this when I came in. I would have been in a lot less trouble. And so it will reduce the incidents you have in your facility and actually give meaningful work. And we actually brought in training. Peer support is actually paid for by Medicaid. So a lot of these jobs that they go in and train in the penitentiary or in the prison, they can actually go out into the community and get a job as a peer support specialist. Those are just some examples. So increasing the humanity, those are just some pictures. A couple of them are from Norway. Of course, the one is from North Dakota. But just really making it okay to care. Okay? It's cool to care. And you actually should care. So just some of the things you can do: allow staff to participate in classes and events, resident-led classes, right? Exactly what Commissioner Kane was talking about. Shared training opportunities, increase positive, motivating interactions with the staff. Examine your rules, because we have a lot of rules that don't allow this. But you have to be smart about it. Don't be naive about it. There's ways to do it safely. And consider new approaches to mental health and other crisis situations. So I'll speed through some of these. So what is the reinforcement? So like I said, I talked about the positive behavior reports. This is very powerful. It absolutely works better than always using the stick. Now, this doesn't mean you don't hold people accountable, but you try to start catching them doing right. So if you've ever had kids, you can nag and nag and nag on your kids to do something. But when they actually start changing their behavior, it's when you start reinforcing them for doing the right thing. Worked on my kids, so works on human beings, trust me. And there's the support. I won't bore you with all the research on it. More evidence of it, more than 60 years of social science. I'm just telling you, it's so powerful. And we wouldn't want to go back on that. So some of our officers were a little skeptical because they'd been in the system a long time. And so we actually had this group in that was doing some artificial intelligence work around predicting medical outcomes, but we gave him access to a lot of data, and he said, does this mean anything? And it was in our offender data management system. And so it did mean something. So what he saw is that if a person came in and they were getting all of these negative write-ups, and all of a sudden that staff started actually responding with positive behavior write-ups, catching them doing the right things for the right reasons, pretty soon that negative behavior extinguished. And then you really didn't have a lot. You didn't have to continue doing that. And so the warden sat at the door and said to some of the skeptics, give me any resident's name and I'll put it in there. And he proved it. So even the worst of the worst, it actually works on it. So I will just say that doing things a little bit differently had major outcomes. MTC, we use the credit coupon. I'm not a big fan of that title, so I think we're going to change it to really just focusing on positive behavior. Because if you do it wrong, you have to do it right. It has to actually look at behavior that needs to be addressed, right? So right now where we're at with MTC, where I'm at, it's a little bit surface. And you want to do it in your most difficult units too. Because if someone's already doing something, you don't want to impose this on it because then they'll expect some tangible reinforcement. If they're already doing it, you don't need to reinforce it. They're already doing it. It's intrinsic. So when you do this, you really have to work with your behavioral health staff to understand how to do it right. Just kind of speed through these. But those are some target behaviors, compliance. When we started it, particularly in the behavioral health unit, it was medication compliance. People with serious mental illness, we really just needed to get them to take their meds, extinguish some of the acting out of the behaviors. And so some of the long-term change we saw is using healthy scoping skills, walking away from a fight, choosing healthier friends, respectful interaction with staff, voicing or displaying new insights. And so those are some of the things, early results and next steps. Just continue to evaluate and build upon those things. Now here's where I really want to talk about in the little bit time that I have left is taking care of your staff. So one of the things that we do is staff peer support. It's so, so important. So we actually provide, and what we call them is care teams at each of our facilities with very specialized training. And so we use them in times of crisis to promote support crisis prevention. You probably have that, but make sure you recognize that when a person may benefit from additional services. So if you don't have it, it's very crucial to have it. So where I'm at, we call them staff care teams. We just recently revamped what that looks like and what we want it, but it's all about staff wellness. And you can't have humane prisons if you don't have healthy staff. And I'm just going to tell you that. Hurt people, right? And so you need to attend to your staff so that they can attend to the residents in your facilities. So the goals of it is to reduce the stigma around experiencing workplace trauma and being able to discuss mental health. Corrections is similar to the military. If you've ever been in the military, you don't talk about having any stress or mental health issues. You have to talk about it, and you need to make it okay for your staff to get help. So we want to improve staff wellness, prevent burnout, reduce missed work time, and improve staff retention. So some of the staff training, there's a lot. So if any of you want the curriculum on this, let me know. Would be glad to give it to you. So here's some of the do's, what we want those care teams to do. We want them to actually move into more prevention efforts and activities versus just responding to the crisis activities, even though that's an important thing. Staff mental health initiatives, some of the things that bond your staff together, do some of those things, respond in times of crisis. But here's the don'ts. They are not providing counseling. They are not the party planners, right? They're not your social people. And they do not provide social services. So there's the do's and don'ts. I'm kind of speeding through this. But here was an example in one of our facilities. So we had an officer whose young teenage child committed suicide. And as you know, your staff are very bonded in. So it's a crisis for that staff member. It's a crisis for their peers. But it was also a crisis for the school where that child had gone to school. So we actually did a whole thing on suicide awareness. We actually partnered with the school. So it was a community event that really focused on supporting people in time of need. So just an example of what you can do to support your staff. And then do some things to de-stress, right? There's a lot of cool things you can do. These are just some examples. And then it's really better together. So we cannot achieve our mission if we are not healthy ourselves, right? You can't pour from an empty cup. And so I say this because when you take on some of these initiatives, please make sure your staff are attended to, especially when something feels like you're doing something really wonderful for the resident population. If you do not attend to your staff, the mantra will be, you care more about the residents than the staff, okay? So make sure the mantra is that we care about all people and we care about you, and here's what we're going to do to make sure you know we care about you. So the successful use of dynamic security includes all of these initiatives that support and reinforce staff as well as residents. And we must make changes that provide a more productive environment for all of us, right? Because if people come out of your institution better, more able to cope with the things that drove them into prison, that's going to make sure that they're going to be good neighbors, right? They're going to be healthy neighbors. They're going to be good contributing citizens. So I'll end with that. That's my email. Please make sure that you reach out if you have any questions, and I'll take some questions now if we have a little bit of time.
Again, we have the mics. There's one here, there's one there. We have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Okay, no questions, or do we have a question? Okay.
I might have missed it, but your corporation, are you operating the prison system in wherever it is, or
So I came from
help me
North Dakota.
understand that? Yeah.
I was the director there for 15 years. And then about little over 3 years ago, I joined Management and Training Corporation over their corrections division. So, and the reason I did that is so I could bring some of the things that I learned in North Dakota to other systems and to other facilities. That's where I'm at now.
North Dakota is an incredible place.
It's cold, but it's incredible.
Good morning, Leann.
Good morning.
Having worked in the same business you've worked in for a few years, I've had situations where the staff were reluctant to change. And I'm being kind with that word reluctant. Can you give the audience some of your clues and some of your ways that you did to help them change? You didn't help change them, but help them change and understand the directions that they needed to go in.
Yeah, absolutely. So nothing works when it's just top down. So one of the things we did is we had, you really need your staff to have a voice in this. And so when we decided to take on these initiatives, we had people in focus groups from all, like whether they're case managers, correctional officers, from the treatment, from the medical group. And so when I decided, I exposed them to these concepts and I said, how do you think, or why do you think we would want to do this? A lot of these ideas that you saw in the photos came from our line staff. And so I always gave them the caveat, I'm probably going to say yes to it, so be prepared to do it. But when it's their idea, when it's their ability to implement in the way they see fit, they feel empowered. So a top-down approach, this is what I'm going to tell you to do. Certainly you need good leadership. The leader can set a vision, but you really need the staff to embrace it through them having a voice, right? So they absolutely have to know that they are heard and what's going to work. So they actually got to implement a lot of fun things along the time too. And so then they have to be heard. So when they have those issues where they're concerned about something, you need to address their concerns, because one of the biggest things why they might express it is they're scared, right? Something might go wrong. And so you absolutely have to attend to, it's not about if things go wrong, it's when things go wrong in this business. They go wrong. So you address it and don't become so risk averse. And I had a lot of conversations about risk averseness, because I said, we get paid in the prison system to take calculated risks. If we do not take risks in a controlled environment, we just lock them down. You can run a very safe prison if you lock everything down and never actually do anything. You won't have any incidents if they're all locked down. But you turn them out and they're going to go and reoffend. So you absolutely have to have those hard conversations about why we do what we do. And I'll leave you with that. So thank you very much, and I really appreciate the invitation here today.